The black sails on the horizon. The year was 1281, and the sea carried death. At dawn, fishermen along the coast of northern Kyushu abandoned their nets and ran inland, shouting warnings that chilled the blood of anyone who heard them. The horizon was gone. Where the sea should have met the sky, there stood a wall of black sails, thousands of them, moving as one. The Mongol Empire had returned. 7 years earlier, Japan had survived the first invasion by fate and storm. This time, there would be no surprise, no mercy, and no retreat. The fleet assembled by Kublai Khan was larger than anything the East Asian seas had ever carried. Mongol commanders believed the lesson of the past had been learned. Japan would fall. Their target was Hokuto Bay, the gateway to the Japanese mainland. And guarding one of its northern approaches stood a small, unfinished earthwork near Hakozaki Ridge, defended by a man already past his prime. His name was Takeda Moritsune. Chapter 2. A warrior at the end of his years. Moritsune had lived a long life by samurai standards. His hair was streaked with white, his armor bore the scars of earlier battles, and his body no longer moved with the speed of youth. But his spirit remained unbroken. He commanded 92 samurai, some veterans, many young men who had never faced real war. They were not elite, they were not famous. They were simply what Japan could spare for a position the generals believed unlikely to be tested. The defenses at Hakozaki were incomplete. Stone walls were still under construction. Earth ramparts were shallow. If the Mongols landed here in force, the position would not hold. Moritsune knew this, but he also knew something else. If the Mongols broke through here, the heart of Kyushu would lie open. When a messenger arrived with orders suggesting withdrawal if the enemy numbers proved overwhelming, Moritsune burned the letter without responding. Some positions were not meant to be abandoned. Chapter 3. The Code that Allowed No Retreat. The samurai did not fight for territory alone. They fought for honor, for name, and for the unspoken agreement between warrior and ancestor. To retreat without order was to stain one's lineage. Moritsune gathered his men beneath the shrine overlooking the ridge. He did not promise victory. He did not speak of glory. He spoke only of duty. He told them that reinforcements would not arrive in time, that the Mongol army would be vast, that the chances of survival were slim. Then he bowed deeply, to the youngest among them as much as to the oldest. Not a single man stepped away. Armor was tightened, banners were raised, blades were checked one final time. That night, the sea glowed with torchlight as the first Mongol landing craft moved toward shore. Chapter 4. When two ways of war collide. The battle began before sunrise. Mongol drums thundered across the water, a deep mechanical rhythm that shook the ground itself. Waves of soldiers advanced in tight formation, shields locked, arrows raining in coordinated storms. Moritsune ordered his archers to fire. The samurai arrows flew true, cutting down officers and standard bearers. Then, as tradition demanded, Moritsune rode forward and announced his name and lineage, calling for worthy opponents. The response was silence, followed by a barrage of arrows so dense it blotted out the sky. This was not a war of names. This was a war of numbers. Explosions followed. Thunder crash bombs burst among the Japanese lines, filling the air with smoke, fire, and screaming metal fragments. Horses reared and broke formation. Young samurai fell without ever raising their swords. Still, Moritsune ordered the charge. Chapter 5. Steel against the tide. When the samurai reached the enemy, the fighting became savage. At close range, Japanese blades were unmatched. Limbs were severed, armor split. Veterans cut through Mongol infantry with terrifying efficiency. One retainer was said to have fought on after losing an arm, wielding his sword with the other until he was buried beneath bodies. But skill could not stop the tide. Every fallen invader was replaced instantly. Samurai who paused to announce challenges were dragged down. Units were surrounded and erased. The Mongols adapted quickly, focusing arrows and bombs on officers and banner carriers. By midday, half of Moritsune's men were dead. The ridge was slick with blood. Chapter 6. The Last Charge. As the sun began to fall, Moritsune stood surrounded by the remnants of his force, less than 30 men. His armor was broken. His horse lay dead beneath him. An arrow had pierced his thigh, yet he stood unaided. He ordered his surviving samurai to form up. This time, there were no banners, no names announced, only a final charge meant to buy time. They ran directly into the densest part of the Mongol formation. Moritsune fought until his sword shattered. He continued with a broken blade, then with his hands, until he was struck down beneath a storm of spears. By nightfall, Hakozaki Ridge had fallen. No samurai survived. Chapter 7. A defeat that changed the war. The Mongols claimed victory, but it was a bitter one. The resistance at Hakozaki delayed their advance longer than expected. Supply lines were strained. Ships remained anchored offshore longer than planned. Commanders argued, momentum slowed. Most importantly, Japanese messengers escaped during the chaos, carrying word of Mongol tactics, formations, and weapons. By the time the invaders pushed deeper into Hakata Bay, they found a very different enemy waiting. Fortified positions, coordinated night raids, and samurai who no longer sought duels, only results. Then the wind changed. Chapter 8. The Judgment of the Sky. Days later, the storm came. Winds tore through the Mongol fleet. Anchors failed. Ships smashed together like toys. Thousands drowned without ever seeing another enemy. The survivors fled. Once again, Japan was saved. Not by numbers, but by endurance, preparation, and sacrifice. The stand at Hakozaki Ridge was never a victory written in military records. But among the samurai, the name Takeda Moritsune was spoken with reverence. Chapter 9. Ashes on the Shore. Morning revealed what night had hidden. Along Hakozaki Ridge, the ground was no longer earth, but a field of broken armor, snapped arrows, and bodies half buried in sand and mud. The Mongols moved among the dead in silence, stripping weapons, checking for survivors. There were none. Every samurai had fallen where he stood. When word of the ridge reached the Mongol command ships, the reaction was mixed. On paper, the landing had succeeded, but reports spoke of unexpected resistance, heavy casualties, and Japanese fighters who refused to break even when surrounded. More troubling was the delay. The invasion timetable had already slipped, and the sea, calm only hours before, began to shift. Chapter 10. Warnings. Carried by blood. Far from the battlefield, a small fishing vessel slipped along the coast under cover of mist. On board were 2 men, wounded, exhausted, alive. They had not been samurai. They were Ashigaru messengers, ordered by Moritsune hours before the final charge to escape if possible. Neither believed they would survive. Both did. Their message reached Dazaifu, the military heart of Kyushu, before sunset. They spoke of thunder weapons, of shield walls, of arrows falling like rain, of samurai swallowed by numbers rather than beaten by skill. The commanders listened, and this time they believed. Orders were sent across the region. Night raids authorized, duels forbidden. Stone walls reinforced. Every lesson paid for at Hakozaki was carved into policy. The Mongols had not crushed Japan's spirit. They had sharpened it. Chapter 11. War without honor. When Mongol forces advanced deeper into Hakata Bay, they expected panic. Instead, they found darkness. Japanese boats struck without warning. Small and fast, packed with warriors who leapt aboard Mongol ships, killed silently, and vanished before dawn. Fires broke out on anchored vessels. Command ships were targeted. Sleep became impossible. This was not the war the Mongols had mastered. Their formations meant nothing at sea. Their numbers were useless against shadows. For the samurai, this was also unfamiliar. Fighting without announcing names, killing without witnesses, retreating without shame. But the memory of Hakozaki Ridge burned behind every decision. Honor had evolved. Survival demanded it. Chapter 12. The Enemy of All Empires. By the 7th day, the weather turned. The wind arrived first, strong, steady, ominous. Waves followed, slamming against hulls already weakened by fire and collisions. Anchors dragged. Ships drifted too close together. Mongol commanders ordered withdrawal to deeper water. It was too late. The storm did not come as a sudden strike. It came as judgment, hour after hour of rising fury. Ships smashed into each other. Hulls split open. Men drowned, trapped beneath armor meant for land. The sea claimed thousands without ever seeing their faces. By morning, the invasion force was shattered. Survivors clung to wreckage or washed ashore only to be cut down by waiting defenders. Japan still stood. Chapter 13. Names that became lessons. In the aftermath, monks walked the shoreline chanting prayers for the dead, Japanese and foreign alike. Bodies were burned, armor was collected, swords were returned to families. At Hakozaki Ridge, a marker stone was raised. No grand shrine, no statue, just names, 92 of them. The story spread across the country, told not as tragedy, but as instruction. Fathers told sons what Moritsune had done. Commanders taught recruits what his men had learned the hard way. Never underestimate the enemy. Never cling to tradition when survival demands change. Never forget those who buy time with their lives. Chapter 14. The Second Storm. Years later, when Kublai Khan sent an even larger armada in 1281, Japan was ready. Walls lined Hakata Bay. Supply depots stood prepared. Samurai drilled not for duels, but for coordinated warfare. The lessons of Hakozaki had become doctrine. The Mongols landed. They fought. And then the sky spoke again. A second storm, larger, longer, more merciless, erased the invasion almost entirely. Ships vanished, armies drowned. The greatest empire on earth broke against an island it could not bend. After that, no Mongol fleet ever returned. Chapter 15. The silence after victory. When the sea finally calmed, Japan did not celebrate. There were no parades. No songs of triumph echoed through the villages of Kyushu. What remained after the second invasion was not joy, but silence. A heavy, reflective stillness that settled over the land. Entire coastlines were littered with wreckage. Broken masts lay tangled like fallen forests. Foreign armor washed ashore beside Japanese blades, rusted together by salt and blood. Farmers found helmets in their fields. Fishermen hauled up bones in their nets. The enemy was gone, but the cost of survival was everywhere. And in the minds of the samurai, one truth had become impossible to ignore. They had survived not because they were stronger, but because they had adapted. Chapter 16. The code is tested. In the years that followed, the warriors of Japan faced a quiet crisis. The old way had nearly failed them. Bushido had taught courage, loyalty, and honor, but it had also glorified single combat, ritual, and predictability. Against the Mongols, those traditions had almost led to annihilation. The stand at Hakozaki Ridge became the center of debate. Some elders argued that Moritsune's last charge was the purest expression of the samurai soul. Others whispered that his true greatness lay not in how he died, but in what his sacrifice taught those who lived. Gradually, a new understanding emerged. Honor was no longer defined by how one fought alone. It was defined by whether the country endured. Chapter 17. A new kind of warrior. Training changed. Samurai began drilling in coordinated units. Night operations became standard. Archery focused on mass fire rather than individual targets. Fortifications were studied, not dismissed as cowardly. Young warriors were taught the story of Hakozaki not as a romantic last stand, but as a lesson in reality. They learned that courage without strategy was suicide. That discipline could matter more than bravery. That sometimes the most honorable choice was to survive and fight again. The samurai were still elite, but they were no longer naive. Chapter 18. The men history forgot. Moritsune never received a grand shrine. His name did not appear in imperial chronicles filled with court politics and poetry. He was remembered instead in camps, in training grounds, in quiet conversations between veterans and sons. Some families claimed descent from the 92. Others simply adopted their story as part of their identity. Monks recorded their names in temple logs. Generations later, children traced the characters with their fingers, whispering them like prayers. Not all heroes reshape history by winning. Some do so by refusing to vanish without meaning. Chapter 19. When the Empire looked east won. Last time across the sea, Kublai Khan died without ever conquering Japan. His successors inherited an empire already straining under its own weight. The failed invasions became symbols of overreach, proof that even the greatest power could be stopped by geography, weather, and the will of defenders who refused to surrender. In Mongol records, Japan became a land of storms and ghosts. In Japanese memory, it became the place where sacrifice proved stronger than fear. Chapter 20. What the ridge still teaches. Centuries passed. Castles rose and fell. Shoguns came and went. Firearms replaced swords. The age of the samurai eventually ended. But the lesson of Hakozaki Ridge survived. That survival sometimes demands change. That sacrifice is not measured by victory alone. That the courage to stand, even when defeat is certain, can alter the future. The 92 did not live to see the walls completed. They did not witness the storms. They never knew their impact. But Japan did. Final epilogue. The meaning of the last stand. Every nation has a moment when it learns who it truly is. For Japan, that moment came not in triumph, but in resistance. In a stand that delayed the enemy, exposed hard truths, and forced a warrior culture to evolve. The men of Hakozaki Ridge were not legends when they lived. They became legends because they died, so others could learn. And that is why their story endures. Not as a tale of defeat, but as a warning, a lesson, and a promise. Some battles are lost, some lives are spent. But when sacrifice teaches a nation how to survive, nothing is wasted. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, and comment.